Betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes, it sits across from you at the dinner table, wearing the faces you once trusted the most. For Lily, it all began with a single cruel sentence, a laugh from her brother, dripping with contempt, in front of her entire family. "You can't even afford a piece of bread." And as the room fell silent, her parents said nothing. No defense, no love, just silence that cut deeper than his words ever could. But humiliation was only the beginning. Because hidden beneath their smiles and family dinners was a truth far more devastating. Her own parents had stolen her name, her credit, her future, shackling her with a $50,000 debt to save the very son who mocked her existence. Imagine the weight of that discovery. Years of sacrifice, every dollar she handed over, every dream she silenced, twisted into a weapon against her. Most people would have broken. Most would have swallowed the pain and carried the burden in silence. But Lily? She chose war. She gathered evidence, found strength in the friends who stood by her, and walked into a courtroom prepared to face down the very people who raised her. What followed was not just a fight for money, it was a fight for dignity, for freedom, for the right to own her future. This is the story of how a daughter, mocked and betrayed, transformed her deepest wounds into power. A story of justice delivered, and a family torn apart by their own greed. Stay with me, because once you hear how Lily turned the tables, you'll never look at the word family the same way again. Asterisk. The Italian restaurant on Colfax Avenue buzzed with chatter and the clinking of glasses, but at our table, everything suddenly fell silent. My older brother, Ethan, leaned back in his chair, swirling the last drops of red wine in his glass like he owned the place. He flashed me that smug grin I knew all too well. Then, loud enough for the neighboring tables to turn their heads, he said, "Lily, you can't even afford a piece of bread. What are you even doing with your life?" The words sliced through me like a blade. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. Pasta dangling in the air as if the entire world had stopped to spotlight my humiliation. My mother, Patricia, dropped her gaze to her plate, pushing a meatball around with her fork. My father, Richard, coughed and pretended to sip his water. Not one word of defense, not one flicker of outrage at Ethan's cruelty. I scanned their faces, desperate for someone to tell him he was wrong, that I wasn't worthless. But all I found was silence. The kind of silence that screams louder than words. My chest tightened as if invisible hands were squeezing the air from my lungs. The heat of embarrassment flushed up my neck and into my face. Everyone in this family had their roles. Ethan was the golden child, the ambitious entrepreneur with a never-ending parade of big ideas. Mom and Dad funneled every ounce of support into him, from money to praise, no matter how many times his ventures went nowhere. And me? I was the reliable background character, the daughter who quietly worked, who quietly paid bills, who quietly disappeared into the shadows while they pinned all their hopes on their shining star. I forced a smile, though my jaw ached from clenching it so hard. I wouldn't give Ethan the satisfaction of watching me crumble. "Excuse me," I muttered, my voice tighter than I intended. I pushed my chair back, the screech of its legs against the tile echoing far too loudly in my ears. The restaurant's warm air suddenly felt suffocating. I grabbed my worn-out coat and walked out, my heels clicking against the floor as Ethan's laugh followed me like a poison trail. Outside, the night air of Denver cut cold against my skin, but it couldn't cool the fire burning inside me. I paced near my old Toyota Corolla, hands shaking as I fumbled for my keys. My heart pounded so loudly it drowned out the city's hum. All I wanted was to disappear, to crawl into a hole and never face them again. But deep down, beneath the humiliation, something stirred. A whisper I'd ignored for too long, anger, sharper and more dangerous than the shame pressing on my chest. Pathetic. Ethan's voice replayed in my head. Can't even afford bread. If only he knew. If only any of them knew what I'd been building in silence. I wasn't the fragile, helpless sister they believed me to be. I'd been working, saving, preparing for years. They thought I was nothing, but I had already started shaping a life they couldn't control, a life they couldn't leech from. As I leaned against the cold metal of my car, trying to calm my racing thoughts, a voice startled me. It was Grandpa George, my mom's father, stepping out of the shadows of the parking lot. He rarely spoke at family gatherings, always the quiet observer, but tonight his eyes carried a heaviness that made my stomach drop. "Lily," he said softly, glancing around as if to make sure no one else could hear. "There's something you need to know. Something about your parents and Ethan." My breath hitched. His tone was low, urgent, filled with the kind of truth you don't want but can't escape. And though I didn't know it yet, what Grandpa George was about to reveal would shatter everything I thought I knew about family and set in motion a storm none of them would ever see coming. I didn't need Grandpa George's warning to remind me that my family had always chosen Ethan over me. His words in the parking lot that night only confirmed what I had felt for years. I was nothing more than a backup plan, a convenient resource to prop up their chosen star. Growing up in Denver, our small two-story house looked picture-perfect from the outside. Neighbors waved, the lawn was neatly trimmed, and the Christmas lights always twinkled in December. But inside, the lines were drawn sharp and clear. Ethan was the golden boy, loud, confident, and endlessly praised. I was the quiet one in the background, expected to nod along and never complain. When Dad lost his job at the bank during the 2008 financial crash, the weight of survival fell on everyone. Or at least, that's how it should have been. Mom picked up extra shifts as a receptionist at a small insurance firm, but most of their remaining energy and money went to Ethan's future. They scraped together cash for his business classes, his marketing seminars, even the second-hand car he drove to meet potential investors. Every dollar funneled into his dreams was a dollar stolen from reality. And reality was me working after school at a coffee shop, pulling late-night shifts, tutoring neighborhood kids in math, then later hustling part-time at an IT help desk downtown. I was 17 when I started handing over half my paychecks to Mom, just so the lights stayed on and the fridge didn't sit empty. At first, I thought it was temporary, a family helping each other through hard times. But the truth became clearer with every passing year. My sacrifices weren't temporary. They were expected. When I handed Mom $100 for groceries, she smiled like it was my duty. When I paid the overdue electric bill, Dad said, "That's what family does," without a shred of gratitude. Ethan, meanwhile, lived untouched. His room filled with gadgets, sleek gym equipment, and posters of motivational quotes. I remember walking past his door one night, exhausted after a double shift, while he laughed with friends about some new fitness app he was developing. They talked about millions, about changing the world. And me? I collapsed onto my thrift store mattress, clutching textbooks I barely had time to study. Once, I tried showing Mom an app I had built, a simple budget tracker I'd coded on my old laptop. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd see that I wasn't useless. That I had talent too. She glanced at the screen, barely paying attention, and muttered, "That's nice, Lily, but your brother's app could actually change lives." Her words lodged in my chest like shards of glass. In that moment, I realized it didn't matter what I achieved. Straight A's, scholarships, teaching myself to code in the middle of the night, it would never be enough. Not compared to Ethan. The cruelest part was that I believed them for so long. I believed I was small, incapable, destined to exist in Ethan's shadow. I stopped trying to win their approval and focused instead on survival. Every shift I worked, every extra gig I picked up, every meal I skipped to save money, I told myself, one day, this will matter. One day, I'll build something no one can take from me. I started keeping records, every dollar I gave them, every bill I paid, every sacrifice I made. At first, it was just numbers in a notebook, then later in an app I coded myself. I didn't know why I was doing it back then, only that something inside me whispered, "You'll need this someday." And as the years passed, that whisper grew louder. Ethan's ventures burned through cash faster than wildfire, leaving behind nothing but excuses. Yet Mom and Dad never wavered in their faith in him. They praised his brilliance, bragged about his potential, while I stood in the background, invisible. But I wasn't powerless. Not anymore. I had skills, savings tucked away in secret, and a resolve hardening inside me like steel. My family didn't know it yet, but every insult, every dismissal, every sacrifice they demanded was forging me into someone they wouldn't recognize. Someone who would no longer be their safety net. Grandpa George's words lingered in my mind like a storm cloud that refused to move. "There's something you need to know about your parents and Ethan," he had said outside that restaurant. His face, lined with decades of wisdom and hardship, carried a weight I'd never seen before. "What do you mean?" I'd asked, my voice trembling. He glanced back toward the restaurant door, making sure no one followed. "They took out a loan, Lily, $50,000. And they didn't use their names. They used yours." For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. My pulse roared in my ears. "My name?" Grandpa nodded, his jaw tight. "Your credit. Your future. All to bail Ethan out of that failing company of his. They told themselves you'd never find out." The air around me spun. My knees buckled, and I had to lean against my car to keep from collapsing. $50,000. My mind scrambled, racing through every possible explanation, every excuse that might soften the blow, but there was none. My parents, my own flesh and blood, had stolen my identity to save the same brother who mocked me in front of strangers. I wanted to scream, to march back into that restaurant, and slam the truth down on the table for everyone to choke on, but my body betrayed me. My throat tightened, my hands shook, and no sound came out. Grandpa placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "You're stronger than they think," he whispered. "Do what you need to do." That night, I drove home through the glittering Denver streets, my headlights blurring in the tears I refused to wipe away. My chest ached with each breath, as if my ribs could no longer contain the fury inside me. The city around me buzzed with Friday night laughter. But inside my old Corolla, the silence was deafening. When I finally stumbled into my small apartment, I didn't even take off my coat. I went straight to my laptop, my fingers trembling as I logged into my online banking. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. And then, there it was. A loan account I had never opened. 2 years old. Balance: $48,732. Interest climbing by the day. My name stamped across every statement. My vision blurred. I clicked through email after email buried in a spam folder linked to my secondary account confirmation messages, payment reminders, all addressed to me. But the signature, the application details, the purpose of the loan, clear as daylight. It had gone to Ethan's so-called company, a black hole of debt disguised as a business. I couldn't stop shaking. My hands gripped the edge of the desk so tightly my knuckles turned white. They had gambled with my future, my name, my credit score, my chance at independence, and they hadn't even bothered to tell me. For years, I'd given them money willingly. Rent money, grocery money, utility bills. I had skipped meals so they wouldn't have to. And all that time, they had been stealing from me behind my back. I pulled open the drawer where I kept the journal app logs I'd been updating for years, the one where I tracked every single dollar I gave them. Page after page of dates, amounts, reasons. $200 for the car payment. $350 for the mortgage. $120 for groceries. My careful records suddenly transformed into evidence. Proof. A weapon. But the realization crushed me as much as it fueled me. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about betrayal. About the unshakable truth that the people who were supposed to protect me had been the ones digging the ground out from under my feet. I curled up on the couch, clutching the printed bank statements against my chest as if holding them tighter could stop my world from collapsing. My breath came in ragged sobs, echoing through the empty apartment. In that moment, I knew one thing for certain. The Lily who had quietly endured, who had bent over backwards to please her family, no longer existed. Something inside me broke that night, but in the shards of my trust, something stronger began to form. This wasn't the end of me. It was the beginning of a war I hadn't asked for but was determined to win. The morning after Grandpa George's revelation, I woke up with a pounding headache, my eyes swollen from crying. For a few disoriented seconds, I thought maybe it had been a nightmare. But the stack of bank statements spread across my coffee table reminded me it was all real. $50,000. My name. My life hijacked without a word. The despair threatened to drag me under again, but something else pushed back: anger. The kind of anger that sharpened every thought, every breath. I refused to let them win. If my family wanted to turn me into their pawn, I would flip the board entirely. The first step was finding help. I spent the weekend researching financial fraud lawyers in Denver, scrolling through websites until one name kept appearing: Elena Rodriguez. Known for taking on identity theft cases, she had a reputation for being relentless. Her office was tucked above a coffee shop downtown, modest and unassuming, but the moment I stepped inside, I felt the weight of hope pressing against my ribs. Elena was in her late 30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to dissect every detail before I even spoke. I laid out my evidence: bank statements, printouts of emails, screenshots of my budgeting app. My voice shook as I told her everything, from Ethan's failed company to Grandpa's confession. When I finished, Elena leaned back in her chair, arms folded. "This isn't just a mistake, Lily. This is fraud. Identity theft. And we can prove it." Her certainty hit me like a jolt of electricity. For the first time in days, I felt like I wasn't drowning. Elena explained the steps. File a police report, gather additional documentation, and prepare to sue for damages. It wouldn't be quick. It wouldn't be easy, but it was possible. Walking out of her office, clutching a folder of instructions, I felt lighter and heavier all at once. Lighter because I finally had a plan. Heavier because that plan meant going up against my own blood. That night, I called Sophie, my best friend since college. She didn't hesitate. Within an hour, she was at my apartment with takeout Chinese and a case of highlighters. While I picked at lo mein with shaking hands, Sophie methodically organized my documents into labeled piles: emails, loan applications, financial statements, transaction logs. "You can't let them silence you," she said firmly, her eyes locking onto mine. "They've counted on you staying quiet your whole life. Don't give them that power anymore." Her words settled into me like armor. Over the next few weeks, my life became a balancing act between my day job at the tech firm and my secret war at home. By day, I coded software and attended meetings, pretending everything was fine. By night, I sat cross-legged on my living room floor with Sophie, piecing together a case that could destroy the illusion of my family's respectability. The calls started soon after. First from Mom, her voice unusually soft, asking how I was doing. Then from Dad, dropping hints about family sticking together. Ethan left voicemails that started casual and grew more desperate as days passed. They knew something was off. I ignored them all. Each time my phone buzzed, I stared at it, my chest tightening, then shoved it face down on the table. Elena had warned me they might try to guilt me into dropping everything, but I wasn't the same Lily anymore. I was no longer their scapegoat, their silent provider. The evidence piled up. Sophie helped me create a timeline that tracked every dollar I had given them against the loan they'd stolen in my name. Seeing it laid out in black and white was both gutting and empowering. One night, as we spread documents across my coffee table, Sophie looked at me and said, "You know, they think you're weak. That's why they did this. But they're about to find out just how wrong they were." Law. Her confidence fueled mine. For years, I had swallowed my pain, convinced myself my silence was strength. But now I realized silence had only chained me. This fight was the real strength. By the time the first official court date was set, I was ready. Or at least, as ready as someone could be when preparing to battle the very people who raised her. And though fear still lingered in the pit of my stomach, it burned alongside something stronger: resolve. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about reclaiming my life. The courthouse in downtown Denver was colder than I expected. Not just the air conditioning that seeped into my skin, but the atmosphere itself, thick, heavy, charged with a weight I couldn't shake. I clutched the folder of evidence I'd spent weeks building, my knuckles white against its edges. Beside me stood Elena Rodriguez, calm and collected, her sharp heels clicking against the marble floor as we walked into the courtroom. Across the room, I saw them, My parents, Richard and Patricia, sat stiffly at the defendant's table. Dad's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the vein in his temple. Mom stared down at her hands, twisting a tissue into shreds. And Ethan, my brother, the one who had mocked me in front of strangers, the one they had sacrificed me for, slouched in his chair, avoiding my eyes. His once polished confidence had been replaced with a hollow shell of defeat. The bailiff called the room to order, and the judge, a stern woman with steel-gray hair, entered. "Case number 2-1CV-1174, she announced. My legs trembled, but I forced myself to stand tall. This was it. Elena began with precision. She laid out the foundation of our case: unauthorized loan applications, email confirmations, bank statements linking the loan directly to Ethan's failed company. Each document flashed across the courtroom screen as she spoke, her voice steady and unyielding. Then came the transaction logs, the meticulous records I had kept for years. Line after line of every dollar I had given my family willingly, contrasted against the debt they had shackled me with in secret. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the witness stand, my knees weak but my voice steadier than I expected. I told the court about the night at the restaurant, Ethan's cruel words, Grandpa George's revelation. I described the shock of discovering a $50,000 loan tied to my name, the endless hours spent piecing together proof, the betrayal that cut deeper than anything I'd ever felt. My throat burned, but I didn't falter. The judge's expression never changed, but I caught the briefest flicker of sympathy in her eyes. The defense tried their best. My parents' lawyer painted them as desperate parents who acted out of love, not malice. He claimed they only wanted to protect Ethan's future and that I was being cruel for dragging my family through the mud. At one point, Mom even broke down in tears on the stand, sobbing about family unity and begging me with her eyes to relent. But I didn't budge. Elena countered every argument with hard evidence, dismantling their excuses piece by piece. "Love does not excuse identity theft," she said firmly. "Desperation does not justify fraud." The room grew silent when Ethan was finally called. His usual swagger was gone. He admitted his company had failed, that he had taken the money, that he had let our parents use my credit because he was drowning in debt. His voice cracked, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes, not for me, but for himself. Hours dragged on until finally, the judge delivered her ruling. Her gavel came down with a sharp crack. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Lily Cole. The $50,000 loan is deemed fraudulent. Responsibility for repayment is assigned to the defendants. Additionally, damages of $15,000 are awarded to the plaintiff. The words echoed like thunder. Relief surged through me, hot and dizzying. I had won. But as I gathered my papers and walked past the defense table, victory carried a hollow weight. Mom reached out, whispering my name, tears streaking her face. I kept walking. Dad's shoulders sagged as if the fight had drained out of him. And Ethan, he looked at me with desperation, his lips forming words I refused to hear. I stepped out of that courthouse into the crisp Colorado air, Sophie waiting at the steps with open arms. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying their burdens. For the first time, I was free. The week after the trial, I moved into a new apartment in downtown Denver. It wasn't big, but it was mine: bright walls, hardwood floors, and a balcony that looked out at the Rockies. For the first time in years, every corner of my home felt safe, untouched by the hands that had drained me for so long. I unpacked slowly, carefully, as if each folded shirt and stacked book marked a small victory. My laptop sat on a sleek new desk by the window, a reminder that my career had survived the storm. At work, my persistence had finally paid off. My managers recognized the long nights I poured into coding, the quiet leadership I'd shown in projects. Just weeks after the court ruling, they offered me a promotion to lead programmer, an $80,000 salary that felt like a lifeline after years of scraping by. Meanwhile, the coals were unraveling. News traveled fast in our neighborhood. My parents lost the house I grew up in. Foreclosure notices plastered their door until the bank took it away. They moved into a cramped rental on the outskirts of Denver, stripped of the stability they'd once flaunted. Ethan's dream of being a tech mogul evaporated completely. His company dissolved in bankruptcy court, Assets seized, reputation ruined. He ended up working behind the counter at a local electronics store, ringing up gadgets he once pretended to design. Part of me wanted to feel triumphant. After all, hadn't they earned this? Hadn't their lies and theft brought them here? But when I heard about Dad's shoulders slumping as he carried boxes out of the old house, or Mom crying quietly in the grocery store, the victory felt bittersweet. Justice doesn't always taste sweet. Sometimes it tastes like ashes. Still, I couldn't let guilt pull me back into their orbit. For years, guilt had been their weapon, a chain they tightened around my neck every time I dared to think of myself. Family comes first, they'd say, as they drained me dry. But I finally understood the truth. Family that steals your future is no family at all. Late at night, sitting on my balcony with the Denver skyline glittering beneath me, I reflected on the journey. I thought about the little girl who had handed over half her paycheck at 17, desperate to keep the lights on. About the young woman who coded apps in the dark, unnoticed and unappreciated. And about the moment Ethan mocked me at that dinner table, sealing his own fate with a single cruel sentence. I wasn't that girl anymore. Now, I was someone who had stood in a courtroom, stared down the very people who raised me, and claimed my life back. The cost was heavy estrangement, loneliness, the loss of something I once thought was unbreakable. But what I gained was priceless: freedom, dignity, and the unshakable knowledge that I was stronger than their betrayal. Sophie remained by my side, celebrating small wins with pizza nights and reminding me that healing doesn't happen overnight. "You built this life from nothing," she told me one evening, clinking her glass against mine. "No one can take it from you now." She was right. If there's one lesson I carry from it all, it's this: boundaries aren't cruel, they're survival. Love without respect is manipulation. And silence in the face of exploitation isn't strength, it's surrender. I had surrendered long enough. Now, my voice was mine, my future was mine. And as I watched the city lights stretch into the horizon, I knew I'd never let anyone steal either from me again.